everyone. Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
What is happening, Rush Nation? I thought, because I didn't get to record a podcast last week, I thought I'd do two today. Yes, last week, apologies, I had COVID. Yes, COVID is still a thing. Yes, it wiped me and my family out. And yes, I was in a pretty bad way, but that's fine. So you lucky boys and girls are going to get 3 podcasts today because you've got the brand new NFL show hosted by Joel, which if you haven't had a chance, please do go give it a listen. It's phenomenal. Joel and the gang did an amazing job on it. So make sure you go check that one out. You're getting this one, then you're getting a special podcast tonight with my buddy Kurt Holloway, which I cannot wait to do. He's the current Warrior Bowl champion. He's a former runner-up of the Scott Fish Bowl. That's when they say runner-up, he was number 2 of a giant field of over 1,500 players. This man knows fantasy football. We're going to pick his brain. We're going to set some strategy for the 2025 season, and we're going to win. And that's what we do here on this channel. But I thought in between, I thought I'd just drop some useful bits and pieces and just get a bit of a deep dive in terms of the NFL and fantasy football and getting a good landscape in terms of some things to know. And I think this is really important to kind of just share some things that I think are highly important and some areas where I think players that are potentially being slept on, we're going to sort of uncover a little bit as to where there's some opportunity for growth and why they're going to potentially outperform. And then also on top of that, we're going to deep dive into a lot of other areas as well, just some things to know, some sleepers, a bit of everything, right? So we're going to sort of dance around. And I want to try and keep this to like 20 minutes if we can, although that's probably not very likely. I'm going to start with Red Zone. I think Red Zone is really, really important. And actually, one of the things that Fantasy Points does really well is actually attributes fantasy points to the red zone. And I think this is really important to look at from a position where a player's fantasy points coming from, and more importantly, players who potentially were either inefficient or potentially players who overbaked in that position a little bit. One of the things I will point out is, so someone like Baker Mayfield is going off the board, so QB7, QB8 was actually QB3 in red zone points last year, and it was a big reason for his success. Now, I don't think he's overachieved at all. I think there is, with the weapons that he's got, he's likely to potentially even go up there. He scored 29 touchdowns in the red zone, which, only Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow managed to beat as a mark last year with just the 2 interceptions. He did also run in 3 touchdowns, which is something that is slept upon in his game. Very high completion percentage rate, 72.6% was the best of any quarterback in the red zone. So you have all of these hyper areas of efficiency. He just absolutely rocked it, but there's no reason why that will go down this year. QB7, QB8 for the guy who gets it done in the paint, I think feels a little cheap. So I like that. One area on Josh Allen actually scored the most fantasy points last year, but an area where he can get even more points is his completion percentage in the red zone was just 54.2%, which is pretty terrible when you think about it, right? But he only threw 1 pick, 20 touchdowns. 20 touchdowns feels low for this Bills offense. He did run in 11, though, so that does explain it. He balanced the 2 together, and that's 31, bettered only by a couple of players, which is Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, and Baker Mayfield. Still some areas to look at, so I think there's some growth there. Other players you could look at who potentially can see a positive trajectory. Jaden Daniels only threw 19 touchdowns and he ran in 6. I think you'll see a bit more from him in year 2, so that's why he's going up, but he's not exactly a value right now because he's going at the top of the board. But some other players who potentially are being slept on that perhaps shouldn't be based on their red zone efficiency. Bo Nix was very good in the red zone. 23 touchdowns, plus 4 rushing to 27. Good completion percentage in there. Joe Burrow's completion percentage was under 60% in the red zone, so you should feel confident that will bounce back. He had 30 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. Again, I think that's pretty good. But the biggest sleeper of all is CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud had a 57.1% completion percentage in the red zone, which is definitely not unlike CJ Stroud, someone I'd expect to bounce back. Just 16 passing touchdowns and 0 rushing touchdowns in the red zone with 2 fumbles lost again due to that poor offensive line play. Just 71.8 points scored in the red zone for CJ Stroud last year. His quarterback is too good to be the QB 18 in the red zone. So I see a huge bounce back for him. By the way, you want to look at some players with some real concern. Trevor Lawrence, 44.4% completion percentage in the red zone, just 9 passing touchdowns last year with 3 rushing touchdowns, scoring less than 60 fantasy points in the red zone. That is a significant concern. Yes, Liam Cohen will improve him, but even if he improves him from there and he gets extra production out of him, it's still not going to put him inside the top 12 in red zone points. And if he's not getting the points there, where else is he going to get the points? Because he's not necessarily the biggest rusher in the world. So there's an area of and other players as well I would have some concerns on in that range of the field. You know, Russell Wilson, 51% completion percentage, and someone who's highly known. It's on a different offense, but you'd argue he's not necessarily going to a better offense. Just 11 passing touchdowns in the red zone last year. And Caleb Williams had a 50% completion percentage, just 13 passing touchdowns, 0 rushing touchdowns. These are all areas of concern for those players around there. So just keep an eye on that. When we're focusing in on running backs in particular and their red zone points, Kyron Williams absolutely smashed it last year, was number 1 in red zone points versus by Jahmyr Gibbs, Derrick Henry, Bijan Robinson. So there's no real surprises here. The one significant concern for me is Mr. James Cook, who ran in 12 touchdowns inside the red zone. He actually ran in 25% of his carries in the red zone went for a touchdown, which isn't sustainable. So that's an area of concern there for him. Same with Josh Jacobs again. Just under 25% of his carries went for touchdowns, which again, I just don't think they're sustainable numbers. So I have a little think of a touchdown regression for James Cook and for Josh Jacobs. So there's some things I would be slightly worried about because they're receiving targets. 3 for Jacobs, 5 for Cook is not going to get it done if there is any regression to these touchdown numbers. And again, the yards per attempt weren't particularly impressive, though not terrible either in that area of the field. On the flip side, someone like Devon Achane just had the 5 rushing touchdowns last year inside the red zone. That's an area that you think would better quarterback play, especially as they've got Zach Wilson, who I know is not everyone's cup of tea, but if he has to come in, he will certainly be better than what they have had previously. You would expect him to get more than 5 rushing touchdowns. That's an area where you would expect him to potentially grow in the red zone and do a little bit more. So I think that's an area of improvement, as is for James Conner, just the 8 rushing touchdowns. And here's a shocking one for you. Saquon Barkley had just 6 rushing touchdowns last year inside the red zone. So he had 2 receiving touchdowns as well. But my point is that he actually was hyper inefficient in the red zone when it came off his carries, despite having 3.5 yards per attempt, which is right up there as one of the best in the league. Yes, the tush push is going to take away some, but with injuries to that offensive line, there should be some opportunities if they're getting inside the 5, inside the 10, but not inside the 1, that Saquon Barkley can run up that score from 6 touchdowns. So yes, there's all this folly about too many carries doesn't translate well. Yeah, but there's also rooms for improvement from a positive regression side. So there are things to work on. Bucky Irving's another one. Again, 8 rushing touchdowns inside there. But, you know, you have players like Rashad White, who had 3, who I don't think he's going to have any this year. Jonathan Taylor had only 7 last year, which, again, I think is an area of positive regression where I'd expect him to jump up. Same with Kenneth Walker, who had just 5 off 23 carries inside the red zone last year. I expect that to improve, especially as he is a bit healthier as well. So, again, we've talked about players that are potentially worried about inside the red zone and players who I think are going to positively regress. There's some really good opportunities here. Again, Chase Brown's another one with just the 6 rushing touchdowns inside the red zone. I would expect that to potentially go more in his favor in 2025. Moving on to the wide receivers here inside the red zone. And again, we look at these numbers in terms of who who's performing now. No receiver got 100 fantasy points. The closest was Amon-Ra St. Brown. He had 9 receiving touchdowns inside the red zone. Terry McLaurin actually led the league in 10, so more than surprisingly Jamar Chase, who had 8, followed by Cortland Sutton, which again, if you're thinking about 7 receiving touchdowns inside the red zone, you'd expect that offense to potentially be better this year, especially with better running back options, healthier running back options. He's a real value in drafts right now, going 5th round, 6th round ADP. 4th he was last year in fantasy points inside the red zone with 70 points. You would expect that to potentially increase with more opportunities. He had 22 targets inside the red zone. Only a handful of players could have more than that last year. So if he keeps those numbers, you'd expect him to be really, really good in that zone. Some areas of potential positive regression, Garrett Wilson as well. He had 24 targets inside the red zone, only bettered by Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson were the only 3 players with more targets inside the red zone than him, but only the 4 receiving touchdowns. There is a concern for me about Justin Fields, but I would like to think that there is also less receiving threat for Garrett Wilson this year as there was last year with Davante Adams. You would expect that to potentially go his way, especially as you've got 6 vacated touchdowns in the red zone by Adams that could potentially be heading its way to Garrett Wilson. So there's an opportunity for Garrett Wilson to potentially shoot up boards and prove some good value. Xavier Worthy, just with the 4 red zone TDs, I'd expect that to go up here in 2025 as well. So there's some potential positive candidates there for regression. Again, Tyreek Hill with just the 5 if he plays all year, I'd expect that to go up. CeeDee Lamb with just 4 last year, I'd expect that to go up with better quarterback play. And even players like Lab McConkey only had 5 last year, I'd expect that to go up. Even people like Mike Evans can potentially go up because you had Jalen McMillan, although there is more competition there for targets. So that could change. Players that I'm a little bit concerned about in the red zone, Terry McLaurin could see some regression. He led the league with 10 receiving touchdowns inside the red zone. So that could be an area where he potentially gets a little bit less work, as does T. Higgins with 7. If that all goes a little bit more to Jamar Chase, that could be an area of concern there. And then Davante Adams, he had 6 last year. Does he get 6 this year with Puka Nacua knocking on the door? That might be a little bit more challenging. So that might be one to worry about. And then Jaden Reed was sort of the favored red zone target last year, although he did only have 11 targets in the red zone and he caught half of those for touchdowns. With 5, I don't necessarily expect that same efficiency in 2025. And with Matthew Golden there, another one to keep an eye on. Some players that just had ridiculous efficiency. Andre Yoshevas, 10 targets, 7 catches, 6 touchdowns. Can't see that happening again. Exactly the same with Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, 10 targets, 7 catches, and 6 touchdowns. Can't see that happen again either. Same with Jalen Tolbert, 13 targets, 8 catches, 7 touchdowns. Don't see that one happening for Jalen Tolbert either this year. That covers it for the wide receivers. And then again, there are some players here. DJ Moore had 21 targets inside the red zone, just 2 for touchdowns, and Deebo Samuel as well with just 2 red zone touchdowns. Different team. I'd expect those numbers to go up in 2025. And then moving on to the tight ends very, very quickly. There is some interesting numbers here in terms of Mark Andrews having 11 receiving touchdowns off just 16 targets last year. That hyper efficiency, I can't see it. He actually led tight ends by a long way inside the red zone. If that target number remains the same, I expect that touchdown number to come down. So he's going to need some more targets in the red zone for me in order to hold on. So I expect some inefficiency and therefore regression to come down that way. Johnny Smith on a different team is another one. Zach Ertz as well, 19 targets and 7 touchdowns. I'm not sure it's going to fall the same way for him this year. Ben Sinnott could catch him for targets this year, potentially. But if you look at the big guys here, Sam Laporta, 19 targets, 5 touchdowns. Travis Kelce, 25 targets, 3 touchdowns. That Travis Kelce line feels very false for me. I feel like there's an opportunity for him to increase his touchdowns inside the red zone. I know everyone's worried that the wheels are going to fall off. There isn't a lot of competition behind him, especially as Noah Gray had 10 targets and 4 touchdowns. I don't expect that high proficiency to come back his way either. So I expect that one to potentially improve in his favor. David Njoku, 14 targets, just the 4 touchdowns, better quarterback play. I'd expect that to go north as well. There are also other shout outs here for potential players like Kyle Pitts, 11 targets, 2 touchdowns. Brock Bowers, 15 targets, just the 1 touchdown. You expect those to severely improve with better quarterback play. So you would expect there to be some positive regression to some of these. Mike Gesicki, 10 targets and 1 touchdown as well. There's some big improvements that could be made to the efficiencies in those numbers. So something to keep an eye on. One of the things I also really, really like when I look at fantasy points data is their excellent expected fantasy points differential. Like who severely outproduced their fantasy points differential, and is there any room for that to be baked down? So leading the league last year in fantasy points over expected was Jahmyr Gibbs, 6.1 fantasy points per game over expected, followed by Derrick Henry, 5.9, Saquon, 5.0. Taysom Hill was 4th, but it's Taysom Hill and not to worry about. Jamar Chase. Then there's some surprising names here. Chris Godwin, Terrell Shavers, not one to really worry about. James Cook and Ross St. Brown. Then Devonta Smith. Now, you can take this one of 2 ways. Good players tend to exceed their points, expected points. That makes sense, that they're always going to do better than the average, therefore they will score more. And that's absolutely true. I think when you look at this, I think with players like with Gibbs, with Henry, and Barkley, these players should always tend to overproduce. Will they overproduce by quite this much in 2025? Remains to be seen. I think there's opportunities for efficiencies on all of these, and some opportunities for regression for Barkley in particular. His biggest regression area will be his air yards, 7.1 air yard opportunities last year. So I'd expect that to decrease, and then that could potentially reduce down his points. But then, as I've talked about, there's other opportunities for gain for him. So what I would say from all of here is that there are some players to keep an eye on, but nothing I'd be too worried about. The players I'd be more worried about, like the Jaden Reeds of this world, Tucker Kraft, far out exceed expectations, 2.7 points per game. That could be an issue. Bryce Young, 2.4 points per game. Again, I could see that easily regressing back to a mean for sure. Brian Thomas, 2.2, one to watch. There are certain players here that I'd just be keeping an eye on who could see some negative regression back to the mean. Josh Jacobs, 1.8 points, for example. Again, Jordan Addison, 1.6 points. They're players I would probably keep an eye on a little bit. If I was to flip this in reverse and look at potential players who were severely under their fantasy points differentials and massively underperformed, I'm going to exclude there's some certain players with very minimal criteria, played 1-2 games, didn't get many opportunities. The one that really screams out in this, there's 2 players here in the top 10 I would say really scream out. The first is Brandon Ayuk. Brandon Ayuk was credited with 7 games last year, finished with a negative 3.2 fantasy point differential per game. That's just not going to happen. A player of his talent, regardless of what's going on. I know he's injured for half a season, but I'd expect him to bounce back for sure. The other is Christian Kirk, completely different situation now. He's going to Houston. I think that's one for sure. I would expect to see him fix that. So again, he was -3 last year. I wouldn't expect that to stick. Other players as well, such as Isaiah Pacheco and Travis Etienne, -2.7, -2.6. I'd expect them to go the other way into some form of positive realm. And the reason why for that is because both those players played injured last year. They're healthier this year. I would expect those to lead to a positive number. And if that does, with their current usage, you're going to see a significant sort of 30-point jump just there from the regression back to the mean. So some interesting numbers there to take in. Quick look at sort of some values here and potential sort of league winners per position when you're sitting there looking at their sort of value. One that really stands out for me in terms of a 1 QB league or a 2 QB league is Brock Purdy. He's not a player I've taken absolutely loads. He's going off at QB 12, ADP around about 100 or so. For me, I think he's potential like top 6. He's going to have a better offense. He's going to have more weapons associated with him. So he's a player I absolutely feel is a significant value and could really help you win leagues if you're sitting there waiting late. Another one as well is Drake May. QB 17 off the board. He easily is a top 10 QB in my projections, ADP of 143. You're going to have players like Stephon Diggs going that way, although some reports out of camp that he is not settling very well. But more importantly, he's getting a significant increase at OC. He's got rid of Alex Van Pelt, who, without being rude, has kind of nicked a living in the NFL over the last few years with the Browns and now the Patriots. And he has been replaced by Josh McDaniels. We know what Josh McDaniels can do as an offensive coordinator. Thoughts aside of what you think as a head coach, he's going to have a lot of options with a proper true number one receiver and with Hunter Henry there. I think there's a massive opportunity there. And another one as well with JJ McCarthy. Again, he's going off at ADP around about 150, QB 19. Again, he's easily a top 10 quarterback for me. He's got the best weapons in the league to play with. I think he's an absolute opportunity for all of you there. So, you can wait at QB and pick up a very, very nice piece for sure. Kenneth Walker for me feels like a player who is significantly undervalued. He's going off at RB17. He's easily a top 12 running back for me this year. You look at what he's got. He's got great ability with a better offensive line this year. You would expect him to be healthier as well. Yards after contact, he was in top 10 in the position. Yards before contact, he was second in the league. So he missed tackles forced as well. He was in top 8, I believe. So, and he still finished with 16.5 fantasy points per game, which put him as the RB12 before he missed those 6 games last season. So he has got this great ability to get points off a bad offensive line. That offensive line has improved. He's going to have a bigger target share in the passing game, especially with Geno Smith there and especially with the weapons that have departed. Last year, he had a 12.3% target share. I would expect that to even go up this year. There's all things pointing to Kenneth Walker being a league winner for you. And finishing inside the top 12, you're getting him RB17. There's a real discount there for you. A player I'm projected high on, much higher than most, is Amarian Hampton. I've got him finishing as the RB12. He is currently going off at RB16, RB17. I think he has all the potential with his scores. If you look at his sport score, 95th percentile, the only other player in the last decade with that higher percentile was Saquon Barkley. He turned out to be pretty good as well. He has got absolutely everything. And with this injury to Najee Harris, he might be fine in terms of with the eye, but I think you're going to have a player here who is going to take over this backfield pretty quickly. And with Greg Roman now running that offense, I feel pretty confident here. We saw what they did last year with J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. I think Hampton and Harris are a significant upgrade on those. I think he's going to offer you significant league winning opportunity there, falling into the 4th, maybe even the 5th round of draft. So keep an eye on him. And another one again, James Conner continues to deliver value year after year. Going off the board at RB19, round about ADP 52, 53 or so. He's easily a top 14 back. I'm getting him absolutely everywhere. Got an extension last summer or last winter, sorry. Ranked 3rd in yards before contact. Ranked 2nd in yards per carry last year. And then on top of that, ranked 2nd in missed forced tackles, 6th in explosive run rate, 11th in yards after contact. And he had 1,100 yards last year, and we're discounting him purely on age and potential history concerns with his injuries. So James Conner, for me, feels like an amazing target to go and grab. At his value, you're getting him basically as your third running back on the board, maybe your second, depending on your strategy, but he's going to offer you significant value. One player who's going to offer you significant value is Tyreek Hill. I've seen him going as late as 4th round in drafts, if not end of 3rd, going off anywhere from sort of wide receiver 12 to wide receiver 16, which is absolutely crazy. And purely the only reason for that is just down to this fact of he might not play. But I think we're locked in. I think he's going to play. He, for me, is an absolute bona fide speedster. I think he ran a race against Noah Lyles, who's the Olympic champion. I don't think he was miles behind him. In terms of what he achieves, you're talking about 100-yard receiving games since 2022. He's second to only Justin Jefferson. Also, their defense is absolutely abysmal. They're going to be a lot of shootouts. They're going to need to get the ball to Tyreek Hill. And if Tua does go out with concussion, Zach Wilson is no slouch. He is a former number 1 first-round draft pick, number 2 overall. He's going to give you a lot there. So I think you're going to see more comeback for Tyreek Hill this year, if nothing else, because if he wants to get out, he wants to get paid one more time, he's going to need to have that good season to do that. I think this is the opportunity for him to do that. So I love him at his value. He could be a league winner for you for sure. Some other values, Jerry Jeudy's going off the board as like wide receiver 33, which I just don't understand. He's a wide receiver 2 all day long. He's a former first-round pick. He's had absolutely no support at quarterback, and I know it's a bit of a mess there. But if you look at last season, he averaged 18.5 fantasy points per game. And that was without Deshaun Watson, with just the garbage that they had. So they've got a better quarterback there in Joe Flacco. He'll earn the most starts there. I think you've got this ability to have a better play caller now that Ken Dorsey's gone. And I think you're going to have a better situation for Jerry Jeudy to catch passes. So I fully expect him to really kick on, and he's going to far outperform that sort of wide receiver 34 he's going off at right now. So, and then another one I would be targeting because his ADP is dropping significantly is Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison's ADP is down to almost wide receiver 40 because of the suspension. The suspension's for 3 games. You can get through the first 3 games of the season with him on your bench. You're going to be in a really good spot with him. We know what he's going to do. He's on a good offense with an upgrade at QB as well. And if anything happens to Justin Jefferson, you know you've got a potential league winner on your hand. So I think you're going to have a significant presence there on your team, and he just feels a value and is going far too low in drafts this season. Just a quick note on Ashton Jeanty. Graham Barfield does his yards created in college. Of all the players that he has tracked, I think since 2014, I think it is. Don't hold me to that. At least 2015, but it might be 2014. Ashton Jeanty is 3rd best overall in terms of yards created per attempt at 6.19 yards. Only Darrell Henderson and Joe Mixon have got better marks than him, and he's got better marks than Saquon Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott, Kenneth Walker, Leonard Fournette, Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey, for example. So, you know, this is a good sign that Ashton Jeanty is going to be as good as delivered. 2 notes to say that RJ Harvey, 5.67 puts him right thereabouts with Christian McCaffrey, but also on the other side of him is Marshawn Lloyd, who has not done anything in the NFL. So take that with a pinch of salt. But yeah, I think in terms of him, that gives a good sign. And then also on top of that, just looking at the 2025 class, Amari Hampton 5.08, Byshore Tootin 5.25. So, and even Quishon Judkins, who now is a huge value in drafts, 4.55. These guys aren't slouches and should definitely raise the game at the running back position this season. Looking at potential sleepers, players that you can keep an eye on, and I said this will be 20 minutes, and it's not. So looking at what experts have been taking sort of in drafts and where they're kind of starting to creep in and buy this value, the top running backs that experts are sort of taking in their drafts at value, the number 1 pick, and this is according to Fantasy Pros, is J.K. Dobbins. He is the sort of number 1 based RB sleeper. And a Carson RB sleeper is ranked below sort of 45 at the position. So J.K. Dobbins being that low feels like a significant winner at the position. Then they've got Byashul Tootin, followed by Austin Eckler, followed by Jaden Blue, followed by Isaac Guerrero, Rushawn Johnson, Jerome Ford. Now, Jerome Ford's stock took a bit of a hit this week. But it makes sense that J.K. Dobbins is just rated ever so lowly. I think he's going to get a lot of the workload early. And that's kind of what we're seeing in training camp is I think they'll bring RJ Harvey on slowly. So don't automatically assume that RJ Harvey has this position sewn up and he's going to be a bell cow because they don't see this. One player that's significantly on the rise is Marvin Mims. Marvin Mims is getting a lot of work in preseason. He is a player that's heavily on the rise. His ADP is wide receiver 57. He is a player I'd be keeping an eye on quite significantly. And another player that some other players that are taking, experts are taking a Kyle Williams, ADP 64, wide receiver 64, Cedric Tillman at wide receiver 67. These are players that are heavily getting backed by experts who are offering significant upside. And Kyle Williams in a Josh McDaniels offense with no clear number two and with some potential upset and what's going on with Stephon Diggs could be an absolute value there for you. And the other one is Tyler Warren. Tyler Warren is tight end 12, feels like an absolute value, and the experts are seeing that as well. So expect him to be moving on quite a bit with the needle as well. Some players who I significantly think are overdrafted. Calvin Ridley stands out to me, first of all. Now, I do think Cam Ward will improve this offense, and I think he will be better. But wide receiver 32, I think it's going to be really difficult to justify taking Calvin Ridley. I've seen him go a lot higher as well. I've seen him be going like wide receiver 24, wide receiver 25 at boards. I think he's just a player I'm just significantly concerned about. The fact that there isn't a lot of options on the other side, I think the fact that they are leaning more towards Esperito, and I think you've got a lot of rookies there. I just think for me, Calvin Ridley is just a bit of a concern, and I'm just a bit worried that they're not going to see. He's not going to get enough looks, and he's not had a real fantasy relevant season for about 4 years now. So he's a player I'm severely concerned on, and a player I'm just significantly worried about. If I sit there and think about other players, I'm just a little bit out on this year. Rashee Rice is a big one for me. Rashee Rice, now, it's the fact that they put the hearing where they've put the hearing is a concern, because you're looking at that with the fact of they're putting pressure on him to accept a higher than he wants to accept ban. And there's every chance this ban is going to be 6 games. And if it's 6 games, it's going to be hard to keep. So that's a player I'm absolutely just not willing to take. Caleb Williams, I think he's looked poor this preseason. There's a lot of reports coming out that he's just not really delivering. He's wildly inaccurate. And to be taking him at QB 15 just doesn't feel like you're getting good value there. Some other players who I'm just deeply concerned on this year. Joe Mixon, his ADP is falling to the point where he's now almost a value, and I have been taking him. If he falls below round 6, then I'm taking him. But if people are still taking him in the 3rd and 4th round, I was in the draft earlier that took him in the late 2nd. With those injuries, and it's a foot problem that could be all season long, there's just a concern there. I'm willing to pay some form of price on him, but the way that Woody Marks is really taking a march and actually becomes a significant value in drafts, and there's a player that you should be drafting in every single fantasy draft right now because he's virtually free. I'd be taking him in the 10th round. Joe Mixon is a significant problem. He could end up losing his job. So I'm just buyer beware on Joe Mixon. You could be getting him at a good price. If you're getting him in the 7th round, then he's absolutely worth the punt. Anything earlier than that, I think you could be severely disappointed that he could be losing his job to Woody Marks overall, and Woody Marks therefore becomes that significant value. Other players you should be walking away from in drafts: Jordan Mason is one. I talked about this on the Patreon cast the other day. Do subscribe to the Patreon, patreon.com/5yard rush. I just think with the money that they've guaranteed him, that $7 million, it says to me that they're thinking of him making the change and overtaking Aaron Jones, and with what he can do and what we've seen him do in San Francisco, I would expect him to be particularly strong and take that role over. There's a lot of movement in Braylon Allen in recent weeks, and Braylon Allen is looking more and more likely, especially with the words from Aaron Glenn basically saying they're going to use him in the goal line. It sounds to me like Braylon Allen could be a David Montgomery light, and there could be some real value to having Braylon Allen late in drafts. If he's being used as that goal line back and then mixing that in with the handcuff ability that he has, he's a player that we should be considering in more detail. So one I would be watching at in more detail and thinking, okay, Braylon Allen is someone that you should be picking up late in drafts for sure. I also have some other players who I'm aggressively ranking above all others. Jonathan Taylor, I expect, will have a bounce-back season for sure. And Christian McCaffrey, not sleepers, obviously, but players you should be keeping an eye on. But Quinshon Judkins, you've probably got about a week at his current ADP before it starts to get right, where his ADP, I was taking him like picks like post 100 in drafts, or around about the 100 range. I was in a draft the other day with Danny, and we drafted him, I think, at 119. That's not going to happen anymore because there's no more charges against him. They've been dismissed. He will therefore be giving up those charges, and he will be therefore free to play once he signs his contract. So it might be a slow start, but I would expect him to be taking over that backfield in next to no time. So there's some real value there. I said this would be 20 minutes. It's been over 30. I'm going to wrap it up there. Any questions, do fire them across. You can join the Patreon, patreon.com/5yardrush. Our listener leagues live. Please find the link in the chat below. You'll find them there. And also check out tonight's show with Kurt. You'll really enjoy it. We're going live at 8 p.m. British, which is 3 p.m. Eastern, midday Seattle. So join us, join the chat, pick the brains of one of the best fantasy minds in the world. And I look forward to seeing you all later on. But until then, Rush Nation, don't forget, as always, keep rushing.